Someone I talked to the other day said Flusha is the best player of all time, which is ridiculous, and I can't believe anyone would ever think that. He then said that Flusha inspired Astralis' utility damage. And for some reason, despite him having said Flusha is the best player of all time before that, I took that seriously and looked into it. And there might actually be a point. Okay, so people will tell you that Astralis like revolutionized utility. Now, part of that is obviously like mollies, flashes, and smokes and all this other stuff, right? That I think they had a major impact on. However, a lot of that people will tell you they really revolutionized nade usage, as in HE grenade usage, doing airstrikes like on overpass, triple nading the jump spot was very common for Astralis, things like that. If you look at it, utility damage wise, I just want to show you 2016, which is the first year that seems to be regularly tracked. The average utility damage per round in 2016 was quite low because people didn't really know what they were doing, and it goes up over the years. So for Pronax, and this is, you know, an IGL, you're expecting it to be fairly higher. For IGLs, it's 4. For Shocks, it's 2 in 2016. And then if you go to, like, let's say if we go to 2019, I'm assuming it's gonna be a bit higher. Some players just aren't great with it. You look at Existence is another IGL. Of course, it's, you know, 3.8 in 2016, 2019, it's 5. It all goes up over the years, right? Then you look at Glaive, it's 4.5 in 2016, which is above normal, right? Keep in mind, 4.5 is like you play 30 rounds, right? That's 150 UD. It's not a ton, but to have consistency with that is pretty good. And most pros nowadays I seem to be around like 7 or 8 or something like that. Shongara is again like 4.4. Then you look at Flusha, who's like double that. And the crazy thing about Flusha, he's actually higher in UD in 2016 when everyone was lower than Glaive is in 2018 when Astralis apparently revolutionized utility usage. In fact, Zipnix is the highest I've ever seen before this, and it was 6.3 in 2018. In fact, I can't really find anybody over like 8. Now, you might be saying, by the way, Flusha, 2015 Flusha, 2016 Flusha, he was cheating, right? He knew where they were. Of course, he could dunk them with nades all the time, right? But if you go like 2017, it actually, it just keeps going up. It's nearly, I've never seen a double-digit utility damage per round until Flusha in 2020 has nearly 11. And then 2021, he's got a down year with only 10 per round. Fucking nobody noob tier player. And then 2022, he actually hits 11. And 2023, okay, I thought 2023 was slightly higher. 2022, he has 11 utility damage per round. That's grenade damage per round. The other highest I can find, actually, after doing a bit of searching, Tabsen, he actually gets to 10. But if you look like 2016, 2017, 2018, he probably learned a little bit from Astralis, right? It's not until 2020 where he jumps up to 10. 2021, he's nearly 11, and then he's dropping back down. But like career-wise, Tabsen is like close to 10 the majority of the time. He's the only player I've actually seen that's anywhere near Flusha. Career-wise, he's at 8. Career-wise, Flusha is at 9.5. So the question is, why do I care? Why am I making a video about this? The answer I have for that is I want to set the record straight. Who should we be crediting for utility? Is it Astralis, the super team, or is it Flusha, showing you how to throw a molly under people and die on pistol round? No, it's none of those. The answer is Kaden. Because if we look at the stats, Kaden has the best flashes of all time. Opponent's blind per round, he is light years ahead of anybody else, 2.53 seconds per round. Second is Tabsen at 2.34. 2.34. It's not even close. The differential-wise, only Fallen is up there with Kaden, and Glaive is a full like 15-20% behind in terms of the differential. He's so far ahead, it's crazy. Now, the problem is Kaden can't throw fucking HE grenades for shit. What is this? 5.7 damage? Buddy, what year is it? Okay, people in 2016 were beating out 5 damage with their utility. Maybe 2023, Kaden starts to throw a little bit of utility, okay? It's still nothing. Look at this in 2016, 1.7. You could argue, you can certainly make an argument that Kaden is the best utility player of all time. Actually, honestly, you can't, because it's obviously Tabsen if you combine the flash usage and the utility damage. But I wanted to see if Flusha did impact Astralis. So I want to take a look at Flusha, then I'll get to Astralis, and then I'll look at Tabsen and show you how utility has continued to evolve. But just to show you what I'm talking about with Flusha, because I think it's possible that he did at least inspire the idea behind being intentional with your utility. And that is something that you can take away from this, is you really should be intentional, because teams back in these days, is they would just do the same utility round after round after round, and they would throw it at the same timings. So I mean, they just double nade down banana, and you would have teams do this all the time. Now, Flesha isn't perfect. That nade's going to do 1 damage, and there's no way to be perfect with your nade usage regardless. Like, it's just never going to be perfect. But you want to make sure that you're varying up several things. And one of the things is you want to be varying up where you're throwing your nade, because if you throw it in the same spot consistently, players don't have to know that they're like, oh, he does this the same, like this way every round. They're going to get a pretty good feel that they can just play safe at the beginning of the round and then play, you know, then take space later, which I think is a major part of what happened with Flush, is that his opponents they would just double nade banana in different spots, but at the same time. So you want to play, not only you want to change up the timings or the location of your nades, but also the timings, where sometimes you hold onto it later on in the round. And you'll notice that a lot with pro teams nowadays, that they're getting better and better at that, because they'll regularly hold onto their nades a little bit later for like nading smokes and things. And then if you find a really good timing to throw a nade, that can be really effective. Now, the thing that surprised me about Flush's utility usage is that I actually think it's kind of almost opposite of what is like easiest and probably most optimal, to be honest. Now, you might be thinking when I tell you this, because I'm going to tell you that Flusha just dunks people with nades. Typically, if you think about it, the earlier you throw a nade, theoretically, the better. For example, all the Ts that come and they want to go bottom mid or banana, they have to come through this choke point here. So if you could get to a spot to nade this before the timing of them crossing, this would be one of the most valuable positions, because then you would get all of the people that went this direction and all the people that went this direction. And the same thing goes for everywhere, because as you go into banana, you either go left or you go right, or you go forward, right? And then once you get to here, like let's say you get to half wall, you either go sit there or you go forward or you go back down banana to A, right? So the longer the round goes on, in theory, the wider the heat maps are. And so the harder it is to get a nade that does like a maximum amount of damage, unless you drop it right on top of people, which is actually quite hard to do. Except that is exactly what Flesha does. Like, Flesha doesn't throw these nades that are early, or like he splits it up a little bit, and I think that's the key. Like, at this time period, in order to get good utility damage, you just had to make sure that you weren't dumping your nades at the most obvious timings possible. So one of the things he's going to do here is he's going to wait for a smoke this smoke got thrown, whatever, several seconds ago. The smoke is coming close to going down. And that's when your opponents are going to be setting up, right? Like, when that smoke first gets thrown, you don't have to be sitting where RPK is right now, right? You can be even further back. You can, in fact, RPK was like down here, because there's no reason to be close to that nade when the smoke, or close to the smoke when the smoke just went up. But as the smoke's coming down, your opponents want to get that timing to come through right after the smoke goes down. They might catch you throwing a re-smoke, and that's the timing that Flush is going to use to toss this nade, literally just as the smoke is going down. Now, it might be even dangerous to throw it that late, but that's when he does like 60 damage with a nade. And that is a great idea for a way that you can throw a nade. One of the problems I have with it, though, I mean, nade damage is nade damage. It's just hard to be consistent with that type of thing. The key, I think, from Flusha is to be very intentional with the way you're throwing your nades, and make sure that you're thinking about what your opponents might be reacting, right? You're not throwing the same nade mindlessly like 10 rounds in a row. But the other thing to keep in mind is that on CT side especially, to do 15 damage 5 rounds in a row is worth a lot more, in my opinion, than doing 75 damage once. By the way, another really, really strong nade, because they hadn't seen much pushback on banana. So this is about the timing that they'd be looking to go for smokes. And oftentimes your opponents will, especially in these times, you would have similar timings to throw the same smokes very regularly. So you could, I can't remember if someone said, it's funny, I can't remember if someone said Flusha watched a lot of demos, or I think someone might have said Flusha never watched demos and he just had a really good feel for this stuff, which would be hilarious. But the reason 15 damage is so much better than 75, right? Like 5 rounds in a row is better than 75 once, is because with an M4, you do 15 damage, now they're a 1-shot to the head, right? Instead of a 2-shot. So you actually make your weapon exponentially better. In fact, you could argue an M4A4 with, once your opponent has taken a nade to the head, or a nade for 15 damage, right? The M4A4 might be better because it just shoots faster and it's more accurate, and it's still going to kill them in the same amount of bullets to the head, right? So I think there is like slightly more value in getting 15 damage consistently, and I think it's a little bit easier to deliver on than dunking on people in most scenarios. But Flusha seemed to have found a pretty consistent way to get a really high amount of nade damage a really high amount of the time. And the joke does remain that, of course, a cheater, if you think he cheated, which I honestly don't, but if you think he cheated, of course a cheater can dunk people with nades all the time. But the one other thing I'll show you is, like, this is definitely ahead of its time, because typically opponents, what they would do at this time period is you would throw smokes and you would wait maybe a second for counter utility, and then you would just go, right? Now, one of the things you can really use in your own is that your opponents aren't going to go with a smoke unless there's other utility also being thrown. So the T's threw a smoke, and I think that was a JW flash there, and there was a flash mid, and then Flusha doesn't immediately throw his nade. Then there's multiple flashes mid. That's when your opponents are most likely actually taking that map control, and that's when he tosses a nade down to actually get the damage. And especially in this exact scenario with your opponents coming out of boiler, that's how it's going to work. They're going to smoke arch, they're going to wait a little bit, then there's going to be a flash, and this guy's going to swing out of boiler or swing top mid to actually take map control. Unless you're playing at an incredibly low level, odds are they're probably not doing a lot of taking of map control without, like, a flash, depending on the situation, right? Like, there's certain areas they might, but something like top mid on Inferno, not a spot they're really going to be taking without a flash. And so just reacting to a smoke is often going to have you throwing nades a little bit earlier than you need to. I don't know if you could say that Astralis, like, was inspired by Flusha, but it wouldn't surprise me that much, because everyone else in this time period, man, is just like, they're just wasting their utility. It's honestly, they just waste their utility. It's like, it's bad. It's real. I think teams just weren't being intentional with their utility. And if Astralis picked anything up off of Fnatic, or off of Flusha rather, it might have just been the idea that you should be trying to vary up your nade timings and be smart about it, right? Don't just throw them for no reason. And then I wanted to take a look at what Astralis' utility looked like, right? Because Flusha is just, it didn't strike me as what Astralis' looked like in 2018. And so if we look at this I am Chicago. This is near the end of 2018, I believe. And this utility is significantly different. Now, that doesn't mean that necessarily Flusha didn't inspire some of their utility, because I think to be honest, I think if he did inspire it, I think it's likely to be that he inspired a lot of, like, the idea behind intentionality behind utility usage, but the actual direct usage, I think, is quite a bit different. So here we have a force from Astralis where they actually prioritize getting 4 or 5 nades, which is rare even today. Device jump spotting, waits until he spots someone and then tosses the nade, because he knows if they spot him jump spotting, they're going to be looking to clear bottom banana. So he actually gets a 60 damage dunk. So this is all free damage. Like, if you look at if you look at Fnatic, I don't think Astralis has shot a single bullet that has hit. They haven't shot a single bullet unless Xyp9x has. And they've done 100+ damage really, really easily. And then not only that, but Xyp9x off of that contact. So if we show that again, so Device is going to toss his nade. Then he's going to continue kind of jump spotting around. The molly gets thrown, and you can use this yourself, by the way. If your opponents, sometimes they'll molly car, then re-molly it, and then they'll flash to get through the bottom banana smoke. That's a timing when a nade could be really strong. So that flash gets thrown, Xyp9x comes over, just tosses a nade immediately when he knows that they're retaking bottom banana. And this is, like, unbelievable. Now, this is much closer. This is, if you look at what tabsen does in 2020, where he's got like 11 UD per round, that's a lot closer to this. The Flusha thing is very different, where Flusha was really looking to dunk on people. Now, nobody on Astralis really, I don't think, gets above 10 UD or even close to it. But as a team, they seem to be doing a pretty damn good job of making it hard for Fnatic to take control of anything without also taking a bunch of chunk damage in the process. And now you've got 20 seconds left, and these CZs are going to be unbelievably effective in this type of situation where your opponents are already lit, so you can just be shooting them in the body. And the argument was at some point that this is why Astralis aims low, because they have so much utility damage throughout the round already. And I don't even want to discuss that, but it definitely is likely what leads them into a situation for this round to be winnable. In fact, I really thought they did win this round, but it's looking like they might lose it, despite, yeah, there you go. Xyp9x finishes off. There you go, clutch minister. If we look at Dupree as the arch player, though, he does do a little bit of what a Flusha was doing, which is, you know, they toss down a smoke, and then rather than immediately tossing a nade, he kind of spends a little bit of time and then looks to throw a nade that's a little bit behind the smoke. He looks to throw it towards top ult, and he gets punished in the same way I thought it was possible for Flusha to get punished when he threw his towards ult. right at the end of a smoke, right? It was very possible he could have gotten punished for that. Dupree this time around, he gets punished for it. At the end of the day, though, I think the key trigger that I'm noticing from all of these teams and players is that they have key triggers for them to throw their utility. And I think it might depend from team to team, and they might have ideas on what does their mid take look like, what is the key utility that they throw when they actually go for mid control, and if there's any tells, because especially back in 2016, but 2018 as well, I think there was a lot of times where teams had pretty big tells as to like, okay, when they fake utility, they throw it from this location. When they actually throw it, they throw it from a different location, or they throw one smoke when they're faking and one smoke when they're not, and you can have tells on that. But I think you can sometimes have tells on like the timing, like how long after they throw a molly do they actually take control of that area. And I think these players, either by anti-stratting or very likely simply by getting a good feel for their opponents throughout the game, end up getting a good read on when that timing is to throw the counter utility in the mid round. And in the early round, they're just layering their utility so that it's not regularly thrown in the same position or at the exact same time. So nobody can actually really read into when they're safe or where they're safe to play a certain position without any chance of getting naded. So when I mentioned tabsen, someone's going to bring up someone with a higher score than this. This is actually the highest utility score I've seen. It's 93 out of 100. Alexi B is at 91 with significantly less utility damage per round. So he's doing pretty well recently, but it's not quite tabsen levels. And I think tabsen is worth taking a look at. Okay, I'm going to keep it 100% real here. I know that now you can get dropped nades, and tabsen gets dropped a lot of fucking nades, okay? He really honestly does, but I think there's other things that you can honestly pick up from him, and one of those is nade timings, and just keeping it a little bit unexpected. So he tosses the initial nade there, then they delay, then there's another nade, and by the way, I think the idea behind whether you should double nade things or single nade, I think a lot of the time, because of what I mentioned earlier with 15 damage being so valuable, I think single nades are honestly underappreciated, where you just do a little bit of chip damage and you can figure out where they are. Like if you nade logs, if you nade logs here, right, and you can look at it after the round and see if you did damage or not. It actually is a pretty big tell as to where they were in that round. But, well, one of the things is that tabsen is actually just going to get dropped another nade. And so now he's got a nade to nade out the smoke. And rather than nading out the smoke, I think he just misses his nade. But maybe he's trying to do a bit of both. He's trying to nade out the smoke and also do damage, because he just does a free, like, 60 damage with that nade there that allows him to get a little bit done. And in fact, I'll just show you this round because honestly, tabsen, he's been struggling a bit more recently, but he's still a pretty unbelievably amazing player. And this is one of the examples of that, where he's just going to manage to pick up 4 kills here in a 1v4. 1v4, by the way. There's the second, almost out of ammo, takes a couple bullets to hit that guy, and then he's going to move through, kill Blame F, and end up losing the round, but that was just really well played. But one of the things that his team has been doing is he's mostly been throwing that nade, a very similar nade at the very beginning of most rounds. And they're actually on kind of a pistol round here, which is another round where it's really, really effective to get a little bit of nade damage. So your teammates can do something like 2-shot them with the deagle instead of 3-shotting them and things like that. And he's going to throw the same nade that he usually throws, by the way, very strong nade, but he throws it later. Right? He throws it just a little delayed on the timing, and that catches Fnatic off guard. And keep in mind, I mean, nades have developed a lot, and so has the ability to dodge nades. I think if you throw nades like anywhere near, like, I feel like it's really an underutilized avenue of improvement for most players, and maybe it's underutilized because, well, it's not that big of a deal, but I think at a certain level it is actually very helpful to get a good amount of nade damage, and it helps you kind of understand the mentality of your opponents, especially if you're trying your best to improve your nade damage, and if you understand where you can nade and what the highest damage nades are, then you're really understanding the rotations around the map and where your opponents are actually playing and what they're thinking about the game, rather than just like you mindlessly throwing nades in different positions. But I'm gonna keep it real in this game. I mean, tabsen is basically mindlessly throwing the same nade every round, and it's just a really insanely strong nade. Like, honestly, like, maybe this is just an unbelievably... So one of the things is, I call this the silver nade, actually. If you have one of the best spawns, 4B, this type of nade is really, really strong because it's going to catch the Ts that have the best spawn. That, you know, Ts that have the best spawn, they think they can get away with it because a lot of CTs will have like the worst spawn and then they'll try and throw this nade. And if you have the best spawn, you can get ahead of it. But if you as a CT have the best spawn or one of the best spawns, then you can throw this kind of quick nade down banana that lands. What it does is it lands between both sides. It lands right here, so like right here. And it's going to get people as they jump into the left side or if they go right side. So it's kind of like guaranteed damage if they try and go into banana early. And it actually, not only does it give you quite a bit of damage, but it gives you quite a bit of information when you look back at it as whether or not they actually tried to go in banana. It kind of just, if you have a very good spawn, it really just punishes a lot of people, and you can throw it relatively consistently. But you want to keep in mind, I mean, I don't think tabsen would be throwing this nade as often if Fnatic wasn't just walking into banana and tanking the damage quite often. And Fnatic probably wouldn't be walking into banana and tanking the damage quite as often if they weren't dropping tabsen another nade to throw a bit later, a similar nade a bit later, or things like that. And of course, if they weren't taking banana sometimes, then, I mean, obviously Fnatic can just give up banana and they'll be completely fine. But there's a tactical pause there where they probably said, guys, can you stop fucking taking damage to this nade? And actually, they would have taken damage to that nade right immediately afterwards. They would have again taken damage to that nade if he had thrown it. But he didn't. So this is actually another pretty interesting round in that there's no way you could ever replicate this if you weren't playing with the team, but it is pretty reasonably interesting utility damage. So tabsen doesn't throw the early nade. He actually decides to pick a side and just dunk someone with a nade this time. And Prosis tries to nade. I think his goal was to nade the other side. Or maybe the goal was to actually nade out that smoke and peek. I'm not 100% sure. But I think he was trying to nade the other side. Doesn't end up working out. Then they end up layering a lot of utility, right? So they already threw a smoke bomb banana. They throw the re-smoke bomb banana. Then they molly into the cubby. Like, if you're playing in a pug, if you ever threw this, your opponents would just be completely screwed. Because they're not ready for a second layer of utility where you don't waste everything right at the very start. Then they actually have a third nade come through because they know that Blame F is... Like, once Blame F is actually spotted, they actually have Searson just dunk a nade directly on top of him. So basically, you've had a 30-second window here where it's not been safe to go inside a banana if you're Fnatic at all without a high chance of getting naded, right? There's no timing that your opponent, that like Fnatic can find here where it's like, okay, well, we know if we just wait out the early nade, we're fine, or if we get ahead of the early nade, we're fine, which is that typically if I play like a pug, even at like face at 10, generally that's how the timings end up working. Players have it, they're comfortable with throwing nades at a very specific timing, and that's the only time they throw it, and you can really easily get a read, especially like outer on nuke. Right? People nade outer at the very beginning of the round, every round, and they never do any damage because you see exactly where it is, or you see exactly when it lands, and you know you can get you can get around it super easily. So tabsen actually buys a nade on pistol round on T side instead of a second flash, which is honestly kind of wild to me. But one of the things I've been testing this recently, and it's actually worked out really well. If your like team is going for a B rush, I just toss a nade quick as we're pushing to this area here. And one of the most underrated things when it comes to nades is actually slowing people. I've noticed it actually slows them, so they really struggle to actually get away when we go for the push. So people will be trying to like fight here, and then they'll try and run away right afterwards, or they'll be trying to swing car and then run away. And the nade just does enough damage that it slows them, and they can't get away, and you actually get the kill. But also you get counter naded for 50 damage sometimes when they nade bottom banana. So you know it's a give or take. It's a give or take. I've been testing it out to see if it's an effective way to throw a nade. It feels super dumb because it is, but at the same time it feels like it kind of works pretty decent. But he actually has the nade and he just waits until someone. I actually think the point of this is that if someone gets a dink off, he can finish them off with a nade, because there are so many angles, especially on Inferno, where you might dink someone but not actually be able to finish them off, and then they're like trapped in a corner. For example, they might be trapped. New box is common, corner or sandbags is common, dark spot is also common, right? There's a lot of spots where you might dink someone and finish them off. I am not, don't buy nades on pistol round, buy armor. And I mean, in a pug, I recommend pretty much you should be leaning heavily towards buying armor. But if you're gonna buy nades, I mean, it's interesting. I'm still not sure it's the best use, but it's interesting. It definitely does jack up your UD stats if that's what you're going for. If you're trying to hit 1,000, which I hit the other day, because I'm amazing and it was like a 50-round game. Forget that part. Forget that part. Just think about the other part where I'm amazing and it wasn't on Inferno totally. It was on Inferno. Tell me I'm wrong. I think tabsen might just be addicted to utility damage. They're on like a full eco, and instead of buying what he could buy, which is a P250, he buys an HE grenade, and he actually hits Matisse for 50 damage. He actually, man, if you're good with utility, it can actually be insanely effective. Like that, 50 damage on that player, then, I mean, they're like a one-shot, obviously, with the P250 to the head. It makes the game so much easier for your teammates. Now, you're not going to go that high up on the scoreboard, but you can say, damn, dog, I've got a ton of utility damage. And you can use that to be like, I'm great, which is true. But then you can laugh at your teammates when they have bad utility damage. And it actually works out. I mean, anyways, yeah, tabsen, pretty decent, I think, player to learn utility from. I think it's clear there. It's interesting to look, especially very specifically, at the evolution of utility over time, especially with HE grenades, because HE grenades are such like a kind of small optimization, but yet they're so important at the same time. And the amount of advantage you can get with them is pretty massive, especially on your CT side. You can get a pretty massive advantage because of the headshot thing I've talked about before. But even on your T side, I mean, the ability to kill someone in 3 shots instead of 4 type of thing gets to be pretty significant in a lot of situations. And it's worth looking at and thinking about. Again, tabsen not only great with nades, but also with flashes, right? Which probably makes him, I mean, you could argue is it an argument? Who's the best utility player of all time? Because based on the stats, when you're looking at nade damage combined with flash timing and flash differential, tabsen seems to be top 1, at least all time. Although you could argue maybe it's someone from Astralis that like revolutionized the way you use utility a little more so, rather than just the guy that built on top of that. You could make that argument. But then maybe it's Flusha